talked about it in letters, and we've talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week, it's our June special subject, chosen by Elise Moore herself. It's the Partition Trilogy by Ritwik Ghatak.
It wasn't chosen by anyone for me.
So we're going to be talking about the cloud-capped star, first of all, and then we'll move through the other two films of this thematic trilogy. It's not a narrative trilogy.
E-flat and Golden Lining
Yes.
are two translations commonly used, made between 1960 and 1962.
The last film I read was made in 62, and there was a delay of 3 years in the release.
So way back when? When the hell was that? Before the world started falling apart?
Not very long ago, but it was obviously before the lockdown, because we saw the Cloud Cap Star at the TIFF Bell Lightbox.
Yeah, well, it was part of the Scorsese Film Foundation series, whenever that was.
It was in January or February 2020, yeah.
Okay. So yes, we saw this. We had never heard of the filmmaker, but pretty sure we decided to see all of the Film Foundation restorations.
Yeah.
This was one of the ones that just absolutely blew me away. I think you felt the same way.
Astounding film.
And having never heard of this filmmaker, we thought the fact that this was part of a thematic trilogy was a good way to easily get to know him a little bit better, depending on availability of his films for us to watch. And it turns out availability is not so good.
The Cloud Cap Star has been beautifully restored. It's on the Criterion Channel. But then the other two films in the trilogy, the second one particularly, the version that we got a hold of, had intermittent subtitles, and it wasn't in very good shape.
Intermittent? That's a mild way of putting whatever that was. It was almost like drunkenly random. Like where someone was asleep most of the time, and whenever they woke up, they decided to subtitle like one sentence in a scene.
Yeah, but the third one actually was
That was pretty good.
Thoroughly subtitled, and the print was in good shape, or the transfer that we saw was in decent shape too.
So I don't think we can really speak very well to E-flat today.
I didn't actually give it a rating on Letterboxd because I don't feel like I understood enough of what was going on, but it was still interesting to watch.
It was also a nice break between two very grim melodramas.
That's true.
And I was wondering if I was even reading its tone correctly, because the shape we saw it in, I couldn't even be sure of that, but apparently it is supposed to be more of it's a folk theater influenced piece, and it is supposed to be more picaresque and relaxed.
It's like Midsummer Night's Dream or something.
Something like that.
Under pretty terrible
conditions.
Political conditions rather than fairy tale land. So we'll start with Cloud Cap Star.
Well, no, I think we'd better do a little overview of what the partition is, don't you? Even though we don't have the best grasp on this ourselves, you have a basic grasp of world history, having studied history at university. As for me, I just sped read 4 articles, so I'll try to chime in with anything I gleaned from that.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, the background to this, it is called the Partition Trilogy, so it is trying to get at certain aspects of life that followed from independence. So,
and obviously this aspect of the films, which is an enormous aspect for the filmmaker in his filmmaking in general, and here in particular, we're not going to be able to speak to that as well as, like, in as much detail as a historian of that period could.
Right, sure. India, there had never really been anything called India before the 20th century. Not exactly, right? There had been empires, numerous empires going back well into the before Common Era, but they had been covering territory that wouldn't include everything that we think of as the Indian subcontinent today. Often it would only be the northern part of it that would be actually under control of Ashoka, who was the emperor who kind of instated Buddhism as the state religion for a few centuries. But when the British arrived in force as part of their grotesque colonial enterprise in the 18th century, they found the Mughal Empire, which was founded in the 16th century by Muslim conquerors. So they had basically taken over all of what we think of as northern India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. This was, as you often get in conquest of this kind, there's a leadership class, political class, and then there's a large underclass of conquered peoples. And there you've got all the different levels of the caste system, and lots of people are co-opted into working with the authorities. So Brahmins will still have authority within their social circles, etc., all the way down the line.
Judging by his surname, as well as by the fact that he was able to become a filmmaker, Ghatak was part of the Brahmin class.
Right.
I might as well say caste. I
Sure.
won't say class.
When the British got there, the Mughal Empire had been very powerful at the start, but it was kind of on the wane by the 18th century, and the British Empire was on the ascendant. And they were able, bit by bit, to usurp the role of the Mughals. Basically, they put themselves in there as a layer, even one above the Mughals. So they kind of ruled indirectly. It was the British East India Company rather than the British government. It was just like a creepy corporation running India for a long time and doing whatever the fuck they wanted. Obviously, they had to obtain a lot of local support for that.
Fast forward to the 20th century.
Okay, so after all kinds of struggles and 2 world wars, British Empire was exhausted, no longer able to hold on, keep its filthy clutches on much of the world.
And somebody named Gandhi was doing things politically in India.
Well, that was going on for 20 years. Before the Second World War and after it, finally, an act of parliament that Britain was divesting itself and officially proclaiming India independent. But when it did that, it split India into 3. So you've got...
Oh, wait a minute. Great Britain did that?
Yes, it was an act of British Parliament that did this in 1947. So...
Why?
Well, that, I think there were probably a lot of historiographical interpretations there. I'm not an expert in this. I think there are some theorists who believe that it was done deliberately to weaken India. Then there are others who are saying this was done according to the same kinds of principles that the United Nations have been trying to instantiate elsewhere, where you would try to keep national groups together, and there was the sentiment that the Muslim majority populations would not wish to share a country with the Hindu majority populations. I don't really know.
And we were talking earlier off mic about the assassination of Gandhi and what were the motives for that, and that actually becomes relevant. It comes up in a few places in the final film.
Yeah.
So his assassin was actually a Hindu nationalist who thought that he was favoring the political demands of the Muslims. Gandhi was.
The fallout from all of this, there were many people who were on the wrong side of the border, left out of this settlement. Nobody really considered too much how this would disrupt the lives of people who happened to be
the minority religion.
Exactly. And this is something that happened in numerous places, in numerous settlements after the different world wars. After World War I, you also have terrible situations like this with Greece and Turkey. They just expelled everyone of the wrong nationality, sent them across the Aegean.
And apparently also there had been a refugee crisis going on for decades because of famines imposed by the British government, according to one of the articles I read.
Well, that for sure, the British government had been trying to fight this sort of independence movement by doing Stalin-esque shit to India, right? Which nobody ever seems to bring up. Everyone seems to love Churchill.
I don't think everyone loves Churchill.
Well, thankfully not so much anymore. They are knocking down some statues, or trying to anyway. I would like to knock down the one in Toronto.
Just in case, that's satire, just in case somebody gets that idea.
No, I'm not leaving the house, but we should get rid of it.
The house anymore. In addition to a widely relatable refugee situation that disrupted the classes of the people who were exiled. Ghatak also, again, according to one of these articles that I read, personally was very disturbed by what he viewed as rupture within Bengali culture. There was a shared language, and there was a long, according to Wikipedia, millennium-long history of literature. And
Yeah,
of course, music and other culture that would have been shared by the Hindus and Muslims.
Yeah, well, on both sides of the subcontinent, this occurred, right? Because the Hindu majority area is right in the middle. To the west, you've got Pakistan, which is basically, a lot of it was part of the Punjab, but the Punjab also, there's a part of the Punjab that was Hindu majority. So part of the Punjab stayed in India, and then the other half went into Pakistan, and it was the same on the Bengal side, on the eastern side. So yes, if you were thinking of a Bengali nation, there are different ways of conceiving of nationhood. Religion is certainly one of them, but then...
And he was definitely not into that.
Language and culture is another.
He was a secularist and a Marxist.
Bengal, it never got a chance to be a country. It was a province of the British Raj, and half of it turned into East Pakistan and then now Bangladesh, and then the other half just stayed inside India, where Calcutta is, and that's where these films are set, for the most part. Or anyway, Cloudcap Star certainly is.
The other thing to know is that Ghatak his films were not, with the exception of Cloudcap Star, well received.
During his lifetime.
By a Bengali audience.
Right, or by anyone. It doesn't seem like it. I mean, I guess he was able to make some films, so he had some support, but it wasn't widespread popularity. I don't think that it seems like it was.
No, and he wasn't embraced by the global art house scene as
Satyajit Ray was.
Yeah, Satyajit Ray was.
Yeah, because they just decided,
who was
one.
Exactly, there'll be one Bengali filmmaker, and that's all that's allowed.
Ridiculous.
And it will be someone who is maybe more Europeanized. Well, anyway, one of the articles I read argued that.
Okay.
And another thing to know, certainly relevant to E-flat, is that Ghatak came to film through being involved with the Indian People's Theatre Association, which was the cultural wing of the Communist Party of India.
Great.
So I don't know if art led him to communism or communism led him to art, but either way...
They just go together naturally, I think.
Well, I never would have really thought so before seeing this man's work. I've never seen Marxist ideas gel with artistically interesting and emotionally affecting material quite this well before. I was very impressed by that. Marxism can make cool art too.
Sure it can.
So where to begin? We're going to begin with Cloudcap Star, the one that impressed us so much.
Yeah, and it is the first one.
The title is, I believe, a misquoting of Shakespeare.
Okay, misprision.
Yeah, so the heroine, Nita, is played by Supriya Chowdhury, who was a very prolific Indian actress.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, very amazing in this, and she is also in E-flat.
You can say a lot of different things about it, and we probably will, but I think I'd like to start off by saying that it might be the greatest brother-sister movie in the history of film.
Well, that's obviously very important, because that comes back in...
It does.
Very significantly comes back in Golden Lining.
And that one becomes one of the most nightmarish, in a way, brother-sister stories.
Those two movies definitely need to be thought about together, and it's interesting because they are both tremendously grim, but there's something about the Cloudcap Star that is emotionally transcends that grimness and has a vitality and a beauty about it, right?
Yeah.
But there's nothing beautiful about Golden Lining. It's, at least not by the end, it's just sordid and like a horror movie. It's one of the most nightmarish things I've ever seen, and one of the bleakest things I've seen, along with like maybe Bresson's Mouchette.
True, but there is genuine feeling and that golden lining in it.
Well, unlike Mouchette, the difference would be that there are people who are good and who can feel in the movie, but they're destroyed.
Yeah, well, they make terrible mistakes, too.
Well, even the ones who don't make terrible mistakes are killed.
Right.
Horribly.
Yes. But I think a lot of it does come down to who we're focusing on.
Well, it does, yeah, absolutely, because the difference is, in this case, the betraying brother. I mean, in the later movie, the betraying brother is the focal point figure. And it turns out that focusing on the traitor or the figure of guilt rather than the victim makes things grimmer.
It does.
A lot grimmer.
But in this one, yes, Nita is our central focus, with Shankar being a very important secondary focus. And yeah, I really do struggle to think of any movie that is nearly as moving in its portrayal of a brother and sister relationship.
I was thinking on a second viewing, and incidentally I went into this a little trepidatious, thinking that it wouldn't be, now as usual, thinking that now that I knew everything that was going to happen, it wasn't going to be as emotional. But it turns out that it's just an endless, bottomless well of emotion.
Oh yeah.
No matter how many times you go back to this fount, like It's a Wonderful Life or Passion of Joan of Arc, to name a few of those for me.
Yeah, I don't think that this one's going to run out of pathos anytime soon.
But on the second viewing, I was thinking what I didn't so much want to think about the first time, which is that in a way it is, I mean, and you can put this in the context of Ozu's family movies, in a way the relationship is incestuous, emotionally incestuous. It is the most important love relationship of her life, and she does very definitely make a choice to stay with her first set of affections, which is her family, but mainly her brother, because he's the only one she's actually close to, but from him, she kind of extends out these emotions to the rest of her family.
That's true.
And over her boyfriend, who she also very much loves, but he's almost like a reproduction of her brother.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Well, he's pursuing an ideal just the way that her brother is, and she even compares them at one point.
She does think of both of them that way, but he's not nearly as interested
Flighty?
in understanding her.
You think the brother's very interested in understanding her?
Yes, I do.
Okay, that's interesting, because he certainly is just as selfish as everyone else in relation to her.
Yeah, but he's a lot more self-conscious about it. He understands what's going on, and he doesn't really know how to get out of it until the end.
But that's often prompted by someone hurting his pride, as she points out. Like, people talking about how he's exploiting her and not living up to his manhood.
I'm not saying that he's doing it all on his own. He's getting a lot of help from society around him to focus on this relationship and what it's doing to his sister. But it clearly is, he's a much more reflective person. He's an artist. That makes sense.
So let's actually talk about the stuff that's not in the movie, the backstory to this relationship, which is that when they were children, they were both aspiring artists.
Yeah, and they went to climb the hills.
They went to climb the hills, which was a difficult climb, but they got to the top and they got to see the sunrise.
And she wanted to invoke Ganesh, but she pronounced it Ganush.
Yeah, they have this whole language between them, including little
in-jokes, yeah.
rhymes and songs. So there's this idealized bond between the two of them that's very far in the past, but seems to be really the most important thing in her life that she's held on to.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. You just feel it anytime they're sitting next to each other, and they are really teasing each other all the time, but nothing can break the bond. They have a kind of mythos. It's like the Bronte sisters or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of Wuthering Heights style stuff, including all of the storms in this film. I was wondering about, I didn't read the full Wikipedia article on Ghatak, but I was wondering about, of course, his own sibling relationships. Interesting in that little documentary we watched to find out that he had a twin sister.
Right.
But that's all we know.
Like Philip K. Dick.
I hope not like Philip K. Dick. That was an imaginary twin sister. Partially imaginary.
This is a real one who lived, yes.
Yes. So then at a certain point, she has decided, well, she's still pursuing she's given up singing, which he's continued with.
But she's been working on her master's degree. It's not like she's become just a homebody or anything like that, taking care of people. She's doing that and everything else.
So their father is a very westernized, or specifically anglicized, middle-class professor.
And that actor is in all three movies.
Yeah, he's wonderful. A middle-class professor who has been displaced and lost his ability to earn in this refugee camp where they live in Calcutta, or outside on the outskirts of Calcutta.
Yeah.
He has educated he's a modern man who has educated his daughter.
She's the only one who's not a disappointment to him.
Everybody else is, well, the obviously the brother isn't a disappointment, except in the sense that he's the eldest and therefore should be earning for them.
Oh, he's a major disappointment until he's not at the end. I mean, he is a good-for-nothing loser.
Well, for the reasons I just laid out. And then the other two are...
callow.
Dopes and dropouts.
Yeah. They're not bad people. I mean, they're
No.
just inert.
I mean, they are living in this shithole.
Yeah, exactly.
They are living in a shithole. They are in poverty. Doesn't really surprise me that an attractive young girl who isn't very academically inclined would rather be spending her time flirting. Well, she's not even interested in flirting. She's interested in getting a husband because she knows that's her future.
Yeah, they're just following
interested in reading novels and whatever movie magazines instead of going to school. Like, this makes sense to me.
They're following the most commonly trod path.
And the brother sees an opportunity, also not academically inclined, sees an opportunity to get a good job and
because he's good at soccer.
yeah, and escape this life, right?
Yeah.
And so she has also met this mathematical genius who Ghatak seems to, based on these movies, like to put a visual, like Joseph von Sternberg, a visual representation of himself to flog in his movies. And the boyfriend seems to be the one in this one, the brother in Golden Lining.
Now, he was a student of the father. That's how they got to know each other.
Right, so it's like Temptation.
A little bit, yeah.
Like the Setsuko Hara movie we watched recently.
And when he shows up and tells the father about how his life has been going, he's preparing for doctoral exams, although he's having trouble finding the funding, but he's been succeeding at every level of education. And every time the father hears about any aspect of this, he just keeps yelling, "Ape! Stupid moron!" He's thinking about his own son who can't do any of these things.
Right, so despite the fact, so the father values
education
and studying and academic life. He doesn't value the art being pursued by this brother, which is, he's sort of like a holy fool Sufi type character, as the filmmakers in, what was the name of that documentary that we saw?
I don't know.
Oh, just some documentary on Ghatak's, mainly on the Cloud Cap Star that we watched.
He is training with a guru.
And actually the father does appreciate that music, because there's that whole scene where he's bringing some kind of singer/guru into the courtyard, and his wife just about has a heart attack.
Yeah, well, because it's going to mean money going to that guy. She doesn't want anything to do with that. They don't have enough money. Shankar has been training with a maestro, I keep saying. He's getting close to being ready to be unleashed on the public. And, you know, there's a chance it could really hit big. Although you kind of feel, when you're watching it the first time, in this kind of movie, usually this character just never succeeds, right? It does throw you a curveball because he does wind up becoming a huge hit.
I believe that Nita can value whether someone's a genius or not. She's accurate about that. She is obviously another genius.
No, and that guy is an amazing singer. So much of this film does depend on the strength of his singing, because he's providing a lot of the soundtrack. And no, of course you appreciate it, but you're wondering, you know, is this really going to become the toast of Bombay? In a lot of movies, a genius doesn't get discovered.
Sure. It's like Humoresque with John Garfield. Ghatak, the world that he paints for us here comes a name, Henry Jamesian zero-sum game in which people can only benefit at the expense of other people. This is his Marxist/melodrama, essence of melodrama analysis of human relationships under capitalism and white supremacy and global colonialism and everything else, right? And patriarchy too.
Darwinian aesthetics.
And so what we feel the whole time is, as terrible as it is that Nita is having to give up all of her aspirations in order to support the dreams of these two male geniuses, which she does very voluntarily and continually insists on it even when they demur, they themselves in this society are barely allowed to continue what they're doing. It takes not only her sacrifice, but an extreme amount of tunnel vision on their own part in order to ignore all of the people who are telling them that what they're doing is shit and useless.
Sure. Well, and the boyfriend does give up, right? He takes a job.
He loses her as his lodestar. He is the one who has written her the letter
that calls her the cloud cap star.
Yeah. Veiled. She's a star that's veiled by circumstances. And she's reading this letter when we first see her interact with her brother playfully because he steals it from her.
She's a superhero.
Yeah, but only he can see.
Yeah.
And even he can't see it too well.
No, his vision is intermittent.
So this is the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about individualism only being possible under socialism. Because Dave and I hate community and we hate collectivism. So we hate whenever these things are, other than economic collectivism. But, actually having to interact with other people and to, put aside our own needs in order to support them. Needs, I'm talking about time, isn't anything that we're interested in.
No, it's not anything that Marx was interested in either. Marx was interested in pushing forward toward a society beyond capitalism where all material needs are met so that people can thrive and experience all of the wonders and agonies of subjectivity.
So what we want to do is pool the resources of the planet in a way that is sustainable and egalitarian so that we all have to spend as little time doing things that we don't want to do as possible, with technology and the planetary resources.
Yeah.
That's the idea of socialism here. And you can see that, again, in this world that Ghatak paints, people who want to pursue anything that is not for gratifying their immediate economic needs or those around them, they're just not allowed to do that. Not without great, great shaming. They are ground in the very mill of the conventional.
They are, by their family, by the people in their settlement, certainly by the guy that sells them the groceries and common household necessities. That guy is extremely judgmental, although also delivers quite a valedictory for Nita at the end.
Well, yes, he thinks that the men should have stepped up and not allowed her to be destroyed and not pursued their silly dreams.
Right.
So, as the father has to acknowledge after he's lost his mind and tried to do a j'accuse and failed in the courtyard.
I accuse
and then the
no
brother
one.
says, who?
Yeah.
No one. Not everyone. No one. There really isn't a way for any of this to have played out according to the rules of this society, for any of this to have played out any differently than how it did. She knows that they have better chances of fulfilling their goals than she does. Like, this is a real intersectional vision where the intersectional analysis of gender plus class isn't just about how women are paid less or how they enter professions that are paid less, but how...
internalization.
Well, yeah, but also just there are different expectations of the genders. And we see the way that the mother coddles the boys that she can make sense of, the boys who are going to at least start earning money, right? And obviously tremendously just has a great preference for them, as opposed to, well, that's the one boy.
There's just one.
As opposed to the daughter who is supporting everybody, who always gets the worst of her tongue lashings because she is dreamy and no one can understand her.
Right.
And ordinary people can't understand her.
There's also, I guess, a feeling of competition between them as well.
Do you think?
It does seem like that, right?
How so?
Well, the mother does seem she has been reduced to this by years of hardship and struggle, and she has been the primary person keeping things together until Nita has come of age to step in. And now she is really the maternal figure that everyone turns to. And I think that there is a kind of envy there as well.
And the mother, I was thinking about this on this viewing, really has, because they're so poor, she really doesn't have anything to do. And yet, to justify her constant hysterical anger, which, I mean, makes sense psychologically. She's like in permanent PTSD, right? To justify this constant hysterical anger, she has to talk about how much she has to do. But because there's no house to keep, no clothes to wash,
well, she
no
does
food
make
to
the
cook.
food.
She does, but how? It doesn't seem like they live in a shack. Like, how much does she really have to do? She did once.
Right.
Right? Or she probably had servants, actually. But she had to run the servants once. There was a household to run. And now there's really nothing. And so...
Well, she does have to try to control her husband, keep him from getting into debt by giving away money they don't really have to actors and gurus. A lot of her role is extremely negative. She has to be on guard against these foolish expenditures.
So the unspoken relationship there is that the father, although at one time a breadwinner before they came to the refugee camp,
and his brain was broken.
And also, the school keeps getting defunded, as he says. He is the dreamer, and therefore she has positioned herself as being the pragmatic, realistic one.
Yeah, there
who has to worry about everything.
It's kind of like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, that kind of formation.
But it's become, due to their circumstances, it has become very, very extreme. So the father is very sympathetic, but all he can really do is observe and wisely comment on what's happening. He's totally ineffectual.
No, he's good for a Wordsworth quote.
He's good to tell his daughter to kill herself. He's perceptive enough about the situation in the end when she's dying of tuberculosis to tell her to go out in the storm and kill herself because she has now become
extraneous.
Well, they have to hide out of sight now sort of the murder that they committed in order to flourish.
Yeah.
It's very Jamesian.
Yeah.
Right? They have committed this violent act of cannibalism. They don't want... The evidence of it is now going to destroy all of the happiness it has provided.
Yeah, if they have to build their 2-story house on her grave.
I mean, I guess we should then also talk about the style of the film, which is very stylized. All of the characters are stylized and partly comical, other than her, really. They're all partly comical types.
Yes, Dickensian, almost.
Yeah, and very theatrical, which Dickens' characters are.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone comments on the unrealistic use of sound.
Well, yeah, I would say, unless people are walking around with this kind of soundtrack and sound effect accompaniment to their daily lives.
So there's a constant flow and use of music, which is also quite unrealistic because instruments appear on the soundtrack whenever anyone sings, even if they're not using an instrument at the time. So there's a constant flow back and forth between these dramatic scenes and music.
Mm-hmm.
And then also sound effects at moments of heightened emotion. There's also, which I haven't heard anyone comment about, but not like I've read about this extensively, is again with the off the beat editing. I mean, the cutting is really important to the emotional effect here.
Yes.
It's also musical, it's also rhythmic. It's part of the rhythm of the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always true of editing, but here the editing is striking. It calls attention to itself. And then the scenes themselves get very stylized at certain points, like the sequence where she goes to her boyfriend's apartment, and I don't know if she hears her sister's bangles.
Yeah.
You think she hears them?
She knows
Or
there's
she
someone
just
in the other
senses.
room. Yeah.
Because she already has an inkling of what's been going on. And so she goes in, and there's this weird shot when he opens the door. I guess it's just his pajamas.
And his shoes.
Yeah, his I guess they're slippers. I don't know if they have any significance beyond his being fancy slippers.
Yeah.
But the camera pans over his whole outfit, and then he lets her in, and she sits down, or behind the Ganesh statue,
Mm-hmm.
and they just sit in silence for a few moments. And then we get that shot of the bracelet. We don't even get a shot of the sister's face, so we also are guessing who it is.
Right.
And then she just gets up and leaves without any conversation.
Yeah, a very brief visit, but she does find out some things that she was wondering about.
Yeah, and then she goes down the stairs, and then we get the whole shot of her face from below. As the filmmakers in that documentary were pointing out, he really likes to, relevant to Golden, cut off the head at the neck, golden lining, or golden thread, that was another translation.
Or stuck with them in their head.
Yeah, so you get the shot of her from the neck up, her distressed face, and then the whipping sounds and various other sounds on the soundtrack, and her clutching at her throat, as if in reference to the loss of her singing voice, or just being completely strangled and unable to express herself.
Yeah, the loss of her capacity for joy.
Yeah, as a loss of voice, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all very unusual and all done with cuts and shot choices, and then the strange soundtrack. It all works. It's just all so heightened. And it's not conventional, it's not the conventional means of melodramatic heightening, which can be very effective. It's all a completely unconventional way to achieve emotional heightening. More like creating your own emotionally heightened language, like, David Lynch does, among others.
It's certainly melodrama without any kind of villain, except for, as you would expect for Marxian melodrama, society or material arrangements, right? There is absolutely no one in this film.
What the father concludes, right?
Yeah, exactly. There is no mustache-twirling villain except for the world capitalist order, and that's pretty unusual in the annals of melodrama.
Shall we talk about the character herself?
Yeah.
Who is a familiar type of character in a Western context from the 19th century novel. The good heroine, the virtuous heroine who suppresses all of her own needs, basically. And I don't know, when Lionel Trilling talks about Fanny Price in Mansfield Park, he says that this is not a character who appeals to the modern sensibility. So in other words, it's hard to make people who are raised on a diet of individualism in the distorted American Cold War sense.
Scarlett O'Hara sense.
Sure. Who are raised on that to like this type of character. Well, Melanie Wilkes is a perfect example from popular culture of the type of character. And I mean, this actress obviously does a wonderful job of suggesting together with the filmmaking techniques of suggesting the special sensibility of a character like this, the depth of feeling.
Yeah, well...
I mean, that whole letter reading sequence at the beginning of the movie, for example.
Yeah, that immediately you're just right there with her.
Her face becomes transfigured.
She's not any kind of aspiring saint. She's not really a renunciatory figure. She's just one by circumstance. And of course, the end of the film, the incredibly moving end of the film where she actually states it out loud that she wanted to live. She wanted to have...
Screams it to the hills.
Yeah. But we knew this all along.
She is that vital life force that is being contained by circumstances and by her own goodwill in a George Bailey kind of way.
Yeah, and sense of responsibility. Yes. Yeah, which they actually call her responsible at the beginning in English, right?
Right. They're periodically speaking in English.
So it's in Bengali, but it is really intriguing, just as someone from outside of that context.
Well, this is what we call colonialism, isn't it?
Which words are just imported wholesale into the language from English. Mostly they're business words. And I guess you could say responsible is something that does come out of that business context as well. Right? It has a kind of a narrow sense.
Okay, yeah.
And we find out throughout the course of the film the broad sense in which she is responsible, not only to, the people around her, but to the cosmos. She really is someone who is trying to live the best possible life in every way, and circumstances really just don't make it possible for that to all pan out.
She doesn't live in that kind of world.
No.
Now, speaking of her heightened feeling and of the Bronte-esque quality of all of this, I talked about her family. Like, she never transfers her affections wholly from her family to her prospective husband, although he does come to be very, very important to her kind of once she's renounced him, because that's like the whole future happiness she was envisioning. He was a major part of that, right?
Yeah.
Just having a life of her own and children and studying together and all of the rest of it. I got this idea from, I remember a long time ago, I think it was in the New Yorker, an article. It might have been about Little Women, it might have been about the Bronte sisters, could even have been about Jane Austen, but I just remembered this idea of it being fairly common in the 19th century for women in particular to not make that leap of transferring their affections from the family to a new family, to a spouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, and obviously, women who didn't marry, as many of those writers did not. At a certain point, she does say to the brother, as sort of her own vision of what she's doing, I love you all madly, and I know you feel the same way. All of you, she means. But you're just too shy. That's the English translation anyway, to say it. Do you think it's true that they all love her madly? Even the brother, I don't know if even the brother can match up to the love that she is giving them.
No, probably not, but he's the one that comes the closest. And he's the one that is the most cognizant of what she is doing, what she's giving up as well, because he knows how keen her mind is and what kind of aspirations she has.
One of the mistakes she makes is thinking that there's kind of an equal trade-off, like that she is doing all of this out of love for her family, but she's getting in exchange all of their love in return. And we don't exactly have that refuted. It's not like some kind of terrible irony where it turns out that they're all like horrible people who are incapable of emotion. Not capable of what she's capable of.
No, again, nobody's a villain, but many people act selfishly, for sure. Gita is definitely guilty of scheming to lure Sanat out of this.
But she doesn't exactly have to scheme very much. She takes him tea a couple of times and he's basically ready to marry her.
Yeah, no. Again, it's not her fault, but she doesn't avoid it either. And a lot of...
Well, if you thought that your sister loved you madly and then she did this, no wonder there's like whipping sounds on the soundtrack.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
That's a sword right in the heart.
And the mother is the one that encourages it all.
Oh, guiltily.
Yeah. So yeah, the family is scheming against her. They do, I'm sure, love her, but...
It's also true that she has told this boyfriend that they're gonna have to wait another 5 years or something.
Yeah, it's not gonna work out.
It's not
clearly.
gonna happen. She honestly thinks that he is going to, because he has such a pure love, he's going to wait forever for her, and this is not something that anyone who's not her is capable of.
Yeah, she misjudges him, for sure, and he proves that.
And what I thought was most remarkable about this character as an example of that 19th century heroine is that she actually says at a certain point, if everyone is guilty in the destruction of me, I also am guilty.
Yeah.
Because I did not assert my rights.
Yeah.
I did not stand up for myself. I am a person too, and I did not stand up for myself.
No, that's incredible. Again,
and you don't feel
rises
like that's
to another level.
You don't feel like that's masochism on her part.
No.
It's quite the opposite, right? It's not like she's found something extra to be guilty about.
No, it was an actual thing that could have been fixed. All she had to do was fight back a little.
Yeah, or just consider herself as a person.
And no, that wasn't part of her initial game plan, and it really did...
I was too much the victim.
Did kind of ruin things. This does sometimes play into blame the victim rhetoric, but...
Not the way it comes across, somehow.
Right.
Because it comes across as... I really believe that she is a brilliant and perceptive enough person for this to be like an extra layer of her perception.
Yeah.
It's part of her self-knowledge that she gains. She
could actually have helped her family by not rolling over and giving in to everything. And she knows that.
Well, but it's not about helping her family. She also means helping herself.
Yeah, but them too. She could have helped them not fuck her over. By just not tempting them that way, right?
That's interesting. It really seems like...
Because Gita definitely thinks of Nita as, oh, she's so pure, she's just going to give this guy the runaround for 5 years. He doesn't deserve that. He deserves happiness now with me. And she deserves to lose him for asking this unrealistic thing of him, right?
Sure.
You can see how people are thinking this all through, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And also, we're not given Gita's motivations, but you could also add to that, things I was thinking of while watching it this time. This guy is such a good catch for the family. Why doesn't somebody get him?
Well, yeah, that gets into Little Women territory, right? Like, he's the Laurie.
Well, no, because she doesn't appreciate him at all. Like, at least Amy does appreciate Laurie. No, he can be put to work. He's smart. He can be put to work. He can get a
Even
good job.
without his PhD, he brings in
much better without
a lot more money than anyone else in the movie is
and
able
she
to.
Needs to get herself off of their hands. I mean, that's actually helpful.
Yeah.
When you're a girl in this situation.
That's true. So yeah, it is very complex web here, and everyone has some kind of part to play in the demise of Nita, including Nita.
Even at the end, when she's having her tuberculosis spells and hiding herself in her room, she does seem to be experiencing, even at that point, some kind of ecstatic joy of feeling.
Well...
Like, she really embodies the romantic poetry that her father studies.
Sure.
She contains all of that within her, both in its sort of calm Wordsworthian or Keatsian form, and in its wilder manifestations with the fever and the storm later on.
Well, Keats knows all about both of those aspects.
And she certainly seems to be half in love with easeful death, or maybe not even easeful at the end there.
No, she's not having an easeful time. She is trying to conceal this as long as she can.
No, but I just mean it never gets to the point where she's simply morose.
Well, she's withdrawn.
Well, yeah, she's completely isolated
She's
herself from the
quarantined
family.
herself, and she is taking every precaution to make sure that she doesn't pass this disease on to anyone else, which is basically a death sentence, certainly to people who have no money.
You know, I never thought of that before, that TB was catching. Like,
Yeah.
I always thought it was just, something that genetically afflicted people who were otherwise, sometimes not even otherwise weakened by malnutrition or things like that. In the 19th century, everybody got it. I guess all I'm saying is, for some reason, the movie, I've already stated this, but the movie never becomes depressing. It's like tragic and sad. But...
Yeah, it's an exhilarating secret that she has, basically, and the film makes that crystal clear when Shankar returns and barges into her room.
Well, he makes the parallel between
her bloody handkerchief is likened to her glorious love letter.
Well, ironically likened.
Yeah, but to him, outwardly, it looks the same until he finds what's there, and that's like the most intense scene in the movie.
But do you think that's a kind of masochism? That this is now her, like, the last thing she can do for her family is to keep this a secret?
It's a kind of ecstasy, right? It is something that is just for her, like that love letter. Which really was just for her, because Sanat, who wrote it, doesn't seem to have even understood what he was writing, so it was really only for her. And also this thing that's killing her is known only to her, and its implications are known only to her.
It's also, all of this stuff about this metaphor of her losing her voice, her ability to express herself. Well, now she has a very bloody way of expressing herself. The blood is like comparable to the
expectorating
the writing.
Herself, yeah.
Yeah.
And it does take Shankar's return in order for all of this to come to light. He's the only one that is comfortable enough with her to go into her room after she has cordoned herself off that way. When he finds that bloody handkerchief, that is one of the great moments in cinema.
And then for some reason, Ghatak doesn't let her pull some kind of Bronte and go out into the night with her picture of herself and her brother, her golden childhood memory, and...
Well, she tries, and she gets stopped by her brother, who's like, no...
You don't get to die in this wonderful, heightened, romantic way.
You get to go to the hills.
Yeah, but that's, like, horrible.
Well, I don't think it's not just horrible, because it is the culmination of a dream as well.
Yeah,
that we've been hearing about since the beginning.
It's very similar to the Golden Thread, actually,
Yes.
in that there is this dream place that people continually want to try to get to. In that instance, they never do. In this case, she does get there, but there's like a really awful irony to it.
Yes. No, it's certainly not unalloyed happiness there, but it is something more than just sadness.
So? You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
But then she talks about, when they're talking, and she starts talking about her sister's little boy who must be running and playing, and I mean, she must be thinking that this should be my child. Like, that's when she loses it.
Sure, but that is a kind of rapture in itself. Her discourse on the hill, where she envisions all of these things from the mountaintop.
What does it mean, though? Because does that mean that she should have...
It is kind of her apotheosis.
Does it mean that she should have asserted herself? Because that's not the answer. The answer is not to, because that's what everyone else did. The answer is not to individualistically assert yourself.
No, I don't think that there is an answer.
I think
it's a poetic understanding that she comes to at the end.
But also I think that she, as terrible as it has been, because more than once, she says it once to her brother and once to the boyfriend, if you don't want me to suffer, just make a case for me and put me in it like a wax doll, right?
Yeah.
I think it's almost like It's a Wonderful Life, after all. She has lived.
Yes.
She has lived.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. She has this
lived
insight.
As fully as as anyone possibly could, but it's not climbing the mountain. That's not what it was ever going to be.
No, but that's where she has the insight.
Yeah.
that is the place where she is able to see her life in its proper perspective.
In a way, yeah. Even though she also sees what she's missed, which is what Henry James is trying to get to throughout The Wings of the Dove, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. That is part of a
The fullest.
A fully rounded understanding of one's life is to know everything that it accomplished and didn't accomplish, and experiences that were had and were not had. It is quite remarkable.
Yeah, this is just one of the best movies ever made.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break and then we'll talk about the other two.
Our second film in the trilogy is A Soft Note on a Sharp Scale, 1961, Komal Gandhar.
Which refers to the Hindustani equivalent of E-flat.
Right. This is a totally different enterprise here. This is a kind of meta-commentary on a culture in disarray trying to reassemble itself, because it follows the story of two warring theater companies who attempt to come together and create something greater than they are, and have a lot of difficulties through most of the film making that happen.
And also some romance.
Well, yes, there's definitely romance intertwined there.
Now, if there are any more detailed political commentary or commentary on art and theater in the Bergman or Renoir fashion, was not available to us due to the subtitling problems of the version that we saw.
Right, yeah, I mean, we only had a subtitle maybe every 4 or 5 lines of dialogue that were spoken, so...
That's generous.
Yeah. A lot of it was just watching...
And some of the subtitles were like, let's get up and go now. Like, why did you bother?
No, but that was awesome. Right? Because that was a guy giving some kind of very clearly windy speech about...
And none of it was subtitled.
The importance of culture, and the people who we're going to be following are not impressed by this at all. They just want to get out of there.
Neither was the subtitler.
Hyde Park.
Our actress shows up again.
Wonderful. Once again, although again we didn't know what she was saying a lot of the time, but just watching her was pretty great. And she is trapped in a kind of difficult melodrama situation because she is in love with the leader of one of the troops, and she's engaged to someone else who we never see. He is off in Europe getting a different kind of education for the post-World War II world order. Anusuya is the character's name. A lot of the emotional weight of the film is borne by her.
Again, there was an interesting... Enough of this did get subtitled for me to take note. An interesting familial romance thing going on with her being so drawn to this man because he reminds her of her mother.
Yeah.
Her mother, who wanted there to be more young revolutionaries.
That's right.
What is the revolutionary context being spoken of here?
Well, that I don't know. I don't think that we got enough information to
you don't know enough about the political situation to guess what it would be?
I suppose we can assume it means people who are fighting for a more socialist nation.
Maybe.
I don't know, though. Maybe it's just an aesthetic revolution. They certainly do
It definitely sounded political.
Unorthodox things on stage. But most of that happens by mistake, and everyone laughs at it.
Well, it seems that the Ants troop has sabotaged the
exactly.
other troop.
So this is something that I think we can look at, right? Like, so here we've got bad faith.
Was that not the actress who played the mother?
Yes, the mother, yeah.
Yeah, and she's a bitch in this one, too.
This is a big problem. If you're trying to bring everyone together and not everyone's on the same page, well, you're gonna have trouble. Just all goes to hell. Other things are just sheer accidents, right? Like, so the actor who plays the father in Cloudcap Star is just not with it enough to take his glasses off when he's supposed to be playing an ancient mythical character, and this basically sinks their entire performance at that point when he does that. The
brother also shows up as a singer and important member of the troupe.
Yes.
And what is his name?
Anil Chatterjee.
Okay.
A lot of it is given over to an exploration of these intra-troupe dynamics, intra-fusion troupe dynamics, and how they're all going wrong.
There aren't many women in the troupe that we're mainly following. There seem to be plenty of women in the Ants troupe. Maybe she took all the women with her.
There's just one woman left, basically, and she...
Well, no, there's two.
I mean, one besides Supriya.
Oh, okay.
And she eventually has her love reunion with Rishi.
She has a lot of problems, too, because her family apparently beats her for wanting to go on the stage.
Yeah, and for falling in love with Rishi. He's kind of playing even more callow version of himself in this one, right? He's not really taking much notice of anything that's going on.
Yes, he's a real goof in this one.
And his confession of love at the end, which will lead to a kind of double wedding. There's
I'll
like a
marry
Jane
you.
Austen.
I like you.
Yeah, it's pretty goofy.
They're the goofy secondary romantic couple.
Yeah.
Which is familiar also from the 19th century novel and from Shakespeare.
But we do get some reminiscences, right, about everyone's feeling of rootlessness and loss of connection because they've been shunted to the wrong side of the river.
It's also an interesting romantic triangle in that she can't figure out until the very end whether she's in love with both men or who she's actually in love with.
And of course, for us, that's hard to parse out because we don't get to see the other
Which
guy.
is also original.
Yeah. It's really all... We have to trust her that this is even someone who's worthy of all of this angst.
Well, I mean, according to our subtitles, she only knew him for 3 days and has not seen him since.
Right, but they did apparently have a really good time.
And
it's not some kind of arranged marriage or anything.
No, and a really long correspondence.
Yeah, that part I think really does come through, because all you need really is to watch her face and see if you believe it, and you do.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, her dialogue, I don't think matters that much about what she happens to be saying about this guy.
In this movie, and also in Golden Lining, becomes apparent the convention of not showing kissing on screen becomes very noticeable because people express their romantic feelings by standing a few feet apart from each other, looking really upset and getting angry. Instead of having, wild strolling kisses.
Right. Well, that can be very romantic.
Standing apart from each other and getting angry?
Yeah. But yeah, beyond that, I'm not sure that we're too competent to comment on this film. Hopefully one day it will get the restoration I'm sure it deserves, and we'll get a chance to see it.
Sure, and many others of his.
Yeah.
Because this is still very, very new. It's interesting how even once a neglected filmmaker gets noticed, what a slow process it is of making their work available. It's much easier to print up a few editions of a book than to restore a bunch of movies.
Yeah, like this one was just on TV at some point and in a really degraded shape. There are scenes missing. There are scenes that
look like they were shot from movie screen. Half of the frame is missing. Like, it was very strange.
And then subtitling, that all you need is someone to really get down to cases and do it. But that, it's not easy work to create full, comprehensible subtitles for a film. But it can be done, certainly. But then this other stuff really depends on the availability of the original elements. And if this is a film that was completely neglected or ignored in the 60s, then, I don't know, the chances are that some of it will never be properly restored, but you gotta hope that it will be.
And we went through this pain with Dorothy Arzner.
Yeah.
Like, a few of her movies have been restored with the
overseen
by
Jodie Foster. Yeah.
But then there are several more that are also deserving and have not received that treatment. Jodie Foster, I'm sure you have a lot of money. Don't you have a lot of time on your hands right now? Like,
Ritwik Ghatak.
Please don't just sing us songs on the internet or just, do something. Do something useful, Jodie Foster.
Restore this movie.
And the rest of you, too, celebrities that are listening to this.
It's not just Jodie. Now, I think we can have a full discussion, however, of the Golden Thread.
I don't know what the title refers to. I would have had to have specifically looked that up.
Well, it sounds like more, the silver lining, right? Like, because they're talking about this mythical place. They keep referring to Subarnarekha, which is the actual name of the film.
Oh, that's true.
This better place that they're imagining as a home at some point that we never see anyone actually make it to.
We like to call it socialism on the Dirtbag Left.
Right.
Utopia,
But this film actually starts in 1948. So it's a full historical drama here. It covers a couple of decades.
Sure, and there's sort of intertitles.
Yeah, it tells us when we're skipping ahead a few years.
Yeah.
So we're at a refugee camp, and we're basically shown... This is a glimpse at the past of the family in Cloudcap Star. I was wondering if it was actually going to involve some of the same character names, but it didn't.
Off screen.
But clearly it's the same situation. A refugee camp, everyone's disjointed and looking for somewhere they can actually settle in.
And I guess they're expanding. They're trying to reclaim some disused landowner territories,
which
is getting them in trouble with the security thugs.
It was a free-for-all, right?
Yeah.
Like, there was no...
What? There wasn't even, like, a reserve set aside for people?
Here's a place where bureaucracy probably could have come in handy, and I don't think that there was nearly enough of it. That's the impression you get, anyway. It was just like, get over the border, and then find somewhere to be, and nobody's gonna help you.
Oh, kind of like when, during COVID, they evicted students from the dormitories.
Yes, on a much grander scale.
Yeah, including international students.
Yeah.
Just get out and find somewhere to live.
This is, millions of people being ordered to do this.
Yes, exactly.
And they have nowhere to go at all. They just have to find some patch of land, some suburb that isn't overpopulated already and isn't protected by gangs of militia who are going to just cart you off if you're from the wrong village.
Well, that's not this place then.
No, they get stuck in a situation where at least some of the people that we're following, a low caste mother, gets dragged off, thrown into a truck because she's from the wrong village. She doesn't even get to take her child with her. It's really terrible. But the family we're going to follow for most of the film...
Well, there are two kind of leaders, seemingly at first, at the camp.
The first scene in 1948, where we see everyone in this jumbled state, this chaotic enterprise to try to carve out a little patch of settlement for themselves. It's Iswar Chakraborty, so that's the guy with the glasses, the Ghatak stand-in.
Right, the brother.
And there is Haraprasad, who is the father from Cloudcap Star. Here he is playing almost exactly the same character.
I was wondering if that was the father.
Yeah.
No, they're very different characters. Very different. But
you get the sense that this is probably what the father was like when he had a little bit more energy, right?
Another great performance.
He reminds me a bit of Felix Bressart.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, in this one, he is really agitated, and he's got his ideals.
He's the holy fool Sufi character in this one.
Yes, definitely.
And he's all about the brotherly love and sacrificing yourself for the sake of the community. He is the voice of socialism, and then the brother Iswar becomes the voice of pragmatism. But, spoiler, neither of these positions works out.
No. And Iswar, his parents are gone. He has a younger sister.
Very much younger.
Shita. So he's responsible for her.
At least 10 years younger.
Yeah, he's basically like her parent.
Yeah.
They intervene and save little Aviram, the low-caste child who doesn't get to go with his mother, and he's just abandoned. It's shown to be an unusual act for Iswar to just take charge of this kid and treat him like a real family member.
Is it shown?
Well, I think
it's
so.
It's unusual for him to do it, or unusual for anyone to do it?
For anyone to do it, right? Because later on, he gets into a lot of trouble for doing it. It's not something that anyone even lauds him for. It's a major problem.
Right.
In his life.
So he starts out seeming like a pretty cool guy.
Well, he is, but things start to go wrong later. Okay, now that we've got that set up, they live in this town for a while, and it's not going to get better. We've seen the conditions in this kind of camp. Going to be the same in the 60s. There's no money, there's nothing.
Well, in the Cloudcap Star, we actually saw the father interact with a theater troupe. So there's the second movie.
Yeah.
And we also saw people coming along and trying to collect money for the refugee camp that they didn't have.
Exactly.
The family didn't have, like, many times.
This is a really precarious situation. It's inevitable that some people are going to just exit stage left if they get a chance. And Iswar gets his chance when he runs into his old college buddy.
Yeah.
Now, Iswar was one of the most promising students. Everyone thought of him as a big brain and bookworm. It just hasn't come to anything because he doesn't have any connections. He can only get menial labor.
Like we saw with the other family, whatever class you previously belonged to is meaningless.
Yeah.
Now. You can't find the same work.
Right. So this friend says, well, my family...
The only work for actually that comes up in the Cloudcap Star, the only work for the refugees now are in factories.
Well,
and the
our
father,
office jobs, like Nita has.
And the father comments on that, and he's like, what was the point of me educating my children, trying to educate my children, make them middle class, now we're all going to be, factory workers.
Yeah. Exploited clerks. That's the lot that awaits everyone, and Iswar gets this chance to get in on the ground floor of something bigger.
Plastics.
Yeah.
No, not plastics. Someone says and one of the articles said it was an ironworks.
Yeah, there was an ironworks, yeah.
Tiny little sweaty, malnourished working class men?
Yeah, it might be both. This is one division of a vast company, right? So College Friends family owns a bunch of diversified enterprises, and this particular location, it's out in the middle of nowhere. Iswar won't be running it, but he'll be kind of like second in command, and he'll be like the head.
The friend says that it's a bad salary and there's no hope of promotion. So.
Well, yeah, he says that, right? But that's all a test as well.
Yeah.
When he says all of that, and then he says, we're going to pay you $150, but it's going to go on the books as $250.
Yeah.
And Iswar says, no, I think you better offer this to someone else.
Iswar is the guy who never lies.
Right, he's a straight arrow.
Yeah.
Completely trustworthy, and that was all a test. And then the friend says, okay, great. That's the right answer. You have the job.
It does appear that it takes him 10 years until somebody dies to get a promotion, though.
Well, yeah. But certainly the circumstances are vastly superior, right? Like the living conditions, at least, are a lot nicer. It's not luxurious, and there's nothing to do there, but at least they seem to be getting enough to eat. And it's
he can also send educating both children. He's getting music lessons for his daughter, and he's sending the boy to boarding school.
So this is a major step up.
Yeah.
And we hear that he's getting 150 rupees per month. So compare that in Cloudcap Star, which is happening in the 60s, she's getting like 40 rupees per month. So this is a decade and a half earlier, and he's getting like 4 times as much when he starts. So it's a much better situation.
But it is in the middle of a fucking desert.
It is, yeah. It's kind of a weird situation there, right? Like the manager is a shell who is half mad.
Right, because his daughter left him.
Right. And this is kind of introduced as something that will be called back to later. Like everyone that winds up as a manager, it's like a haunted job. It sounds like a great critique of capitalism, right? Like to occupy that management role is to be a complete ghost.
I mean, the fact that this movie is about the caste system, I mean, it isn't a lot different than being the kind of colonial, although in that case, as you said, Clark Gable is what he's actually the owner.
Yeah.
In
Red Dust. I think it's different. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but the men, it's conspicuous that the men working for them do not look like they are treated well.
No, that's true. And this guy, he's got a Dickensian overseer. This guy is so oily and creepy. Mm-hmm. Mukherjee.
That made me think of a Hollywood movie, a type.
Uriah Heep, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah. Very Dickensian, very fawning and obsequious, but he's working behind the scenes to undermine you, and he eventually does. But it does take a while, but he's like bad-mouthing the manager right away. And here you've got very Cathy and Heathcliff kind of energy going on, but in a much less
more benign,
psychotic way, right, between Sheeta and Aviram, the adopted brother.
Yeah, she seems to fall in love with him, like, instantly. And it is relevant that when the father says they're leaving, he does initially forget the boy, and she remembers him.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, that kid would have been totally abandoned, and probably no one would have taken charge of his life. He just would have died.
Like a stray dog.
Yeah. When they get there, he has kind of a freak out, because something about this land reminds him of his mother.
The garden.
He's a very sensitive boy. Mm-hmm. That's definitely what we get from meeting him early on here. And Sheeta's the only one that really takes charge of finding out what's going on with him and helping him at all. They explore the grounds. They have kind of like a little childhood adventure on this weird plantation that was used as an aerodrome by the British during World War II.
And they know all of the war reference points.
Well, sure, because This is 1948. The war ended in 1945, and the British were fighting the Japanese throughout the early 40s in this area. They're talking about air raids on Burma, which the Japanese had occupied, right? They'd occupied all of Southeast Asia, all the way up to Burma.
And she mentions that this bombed out building that they're in, this is where the
Pilot Clubhouse.
They go back to carouse all night after bombing Burma.
It's like Errol Flynn and David Niven. This is a kind of haunted space.
The whole thing about new house that they're going to go to comes up when they're going to this place, and it's
Mukherjee.
It's the creepy overseer type guy who.
So yeah, the way it's introduced, this wonderful paradise to come, it's likened to Candy from like a child molester or something.
Pretty much.
And Iswar immediately says, stop telling her that we're going to this beautiful place. We're just going to a regular place. There's nothing like that in this world. I don't believe in lying to children about what's possible.
But she always remembers this.
Oh, always.
This image.
Yeah. So Mukherjee actually...
Of the beautiful house, all the space inside. And
butterflies
and flowers.
Birds. Yeah, it sounds great to me too. And hopefully everyone will get that someday. But yeah, it is weird that it's introduced by this guy, this closest thing to a villain in the movie, really. So weaselly.
Well, there is a way to be poisoned by hope.
Yeah, exactly. We see already the seeds of a conflict between Abiram and Iswar. Iswar is super practical. He is for limiting your horizons to what seems immediately possible. And the kids, they are setting their sights a little higher, I think.
Sure.
Abiram,
yes, they're idealists, just like the brother and sister in Cloud Cap Star.
Yeah.
And they're artists.
Exactly. And when they grow up, we do have a time passage intertitle, and we start to see them as young adults. And here, Abiram is already...
It's almost like the brother from the Cloud Cap Star has been split into these two characters.
Yeah, I think so.
The brother that she remembers, and then the brother that she gets, or something.
Yeah. So he is a budding progressive journalist and author. He writes a novel, a kind of coming-of-age story about his journey.
Well, Iswar admonishes both of them at different points for being so sad in their art.
Yeah, he says people don't want to hear this,
That's not what the people want. That's not what they want to go see or listen to.
No. And he's probably right about that. It would have been good advice for them to turn their talents to more cheerful art, but
it's hard
not
to know,
as truthful.
It's hard to know why the daughter sings so sadly. Maybe she just has a sort of premonition of how her life's going to turn out.
Well, she's seen sad things. Their parents are dead.
True.
And they lived in that refugee camp. So that is not going to make anyone feel very happy, I don't think.
But Abiram, from the subtitles are very vague, but I think we can assume that he is writing socialist literature critiquing the social conditions of, well, everything.
Yeah.
And that is why his novels aren't selling or can't be published.
Right. But he has been getting some things published in magazines and newspapers. So he's got talent, but yes, it's true. He is pursuing a line that is going to be increasingly difficult to capitalize on commercially. And he is now at a crossroads. He has succeeded wonderfully at school, and he's now done with all of his exams. And a significant part of the film happens during an interlude where he's waiting for his exam results. But we kind of know that they're going to be good. And Iswar is planning to send him to Germany so that he can learn to be an engineer, which is an eminently marketable skill anywhere in the world. And yeah,
right. And he talks to Sita about what he should do, and she, of course, advises him to stick with what he already has set his heart on.
Continue with the novels, even if it means penury.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's her take on things. She definitely differs with her brother. Meanwhile, the manager finally dies. We do have like a really interesting scene with him during the childhood portion where he actually does come along and soothe Sheeta when she runs into a guy who has been outfitted in some kind of mythological garb.
I don't know what the hell?
Well, there's a temple on the grounds, right? We're told that from the beginning.
The translation is Harlequin. I did not look any of this up. I
don't know either, but
I will.
I'm assuming he's part of that temple structure.
At first I thought that she
imagined him.
Either that she imagined him or that there was he was an actual god. There was like a break with reality in the film.
No, it turns out that he really was just a guy, and he's like, well, I wasn't trying to scare her. He's just like a guy in a mascot costume. And the manager actually snaps out of it long enough to defuse that situation, which is pretty cool. But
well, obviously Sheeta shares the name for the principal female character in the Ramayana.
Yeah, and he tells her all about the saga.
Well, he doesn't really go into a lot of detail.
No, but he promises
He says
to.
She lives and then she dies, and in between stuff happens.
Yeah,
that's what he says.
There's like 7 chapters missing there, but we do get the sense that eventually she's going to hear about all of this, either from him or she's going to read it herself.
Apparently there's been a study of Ghatak's use of mythology and his association of the heroines of all of these films with different gods in the Hindu mythology.
And manifestations of the gods, yeah.
And the idea, there is an underlying idea, which you can see, and we'll talk about it in a scene in this movie soon, of the women all being manifestations of the Great Mother. Because there's this remarkable scene with the brother coming up where, or it's already happened, when Avaram is not around. She is still very, very much younger and smaller than he is, but she's looking after him because she's the only woman in the house, and then she starts scolding him for making a mess, and he says, you never knew our mother, how do you manage to, or you don't remember our mother, how do you manage to scold just like her? And then she kind of smooths this 40-year-old guy's hair and is like, I am your mother. So there's this whole, yes, she's manifesting the feminine principle, but there's also this interesting mixing up, like in the other films, of different family roles, family members assuming the wrong roles with each other or different roles with each other. Yeah,
and also this is our first evidence that Iswar is maybe going to fall apart. I think.
Well, he doesn't want to be abandoned by her like he was they were by their mother.
And he really is not making sense in that scene. That's what prompts her to start rubbing his head. She's like, you're talking nonsense.
But she also talks nonsense. I am your mother. She means that.
Oh,
She's
yeah,
not
but
just saying
that is a kind of higher nonsense.
That's an actual tender moment between
he's really dithering, though, because he's talking about what he's going to do in town, and it doesn't make sense. He's not sure what he's doing.
So now for a moment I thought we were going to get a replay of Cloud Cap Star, where her dilemma would be whether to take care of this brother, emotionally in this case, or, leave with Avaram.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
No, because
misdirection.
The manager finally dies, because many years are passing here, and Iswar becomes the manager. For a while that goes okay, but then when the college chum comes to visit, this is where everything goes crazy.
And the rich college chum and his wife are just revolting. And it's not done in an over-the-top way. It's just a few little nice strokes of details.
Yeah, just
sunglasses and racism.
Ritwik Ghatak's idea of a businessman.
Or I guess, what do you call it? Casteism?
Classism.
Whatever. It's basically, obviously, everyone says this. Caste system is such a psychotic version of a class system that it's basically racism.
Well, yeah, and it does have roots in the waves of conquest, right? Like where the highest castes were...
So it is different ethnicities, often, in other words.
That's where the roots are, anyway. I don't know
what it is now,
how much of it has held, because thousands of years have passed since the invasions of the first millennium.
But probably people think they can trace case back to something racial.
Anyway, and it's religious, right? It's a kind of religious conservative mania.
The gross overseer talks about how religious this business owner is.
Yeah, and...
meaning racist.
Right, and just wedded to ways of thinking about place in society that definitely help a businessman maintain their status and keep everybody else down. So it definitely works.
Religion is sick joke here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not
as it is in the United States in politics as well.
Yeah, we're not getting a balanced appraisal of piety here. No, we're getting a very jaded...
Anyway, they find out that this boy, who they've never seen before, is an orphan.
It's such a terrible mishap that all of this occurs, right? That Aviram happens to be home at this time, because it never would have come up
Yeah.
otherwise. And
the brother doesn't, Iswar apparently doesn't think anything of mentioning this.
why would he just calls him his brother, and everyone else has just said, great, he's your brother. But the college chum remembers that, no, in college you only had a sister. I remember this. Like, it's too bad that this guy actually pays
And he never
attention.
and this stupid fucker never lies.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
He could just say, oh no, you misremembered.
Yeah. So, no, he's like, no, you're right. I do. He's not really my brother. He's a low-caste child that I just took in.
No, he doesn't say he's low-caste.
But
the owner points out that you don't know what caste he is, so he's a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And then his caste is almost immediately proven.
Right, when the long-lost mother shows up
just in
on
order
her deathbed.
to die in front of his eyes.
Yeah, and out him as an outcast.
Well, he claims her.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I know.
It's like the ending of Imitation of Life. Except he has no hesitation. He just claims her, and then everyone knows. Yeah.
Everything falls apart at that point. So the college chum was there to sign over papers that would make Iswar a partner in the firm. This kind of gets taken back, at least temporarily. The signings will have to happen in Calcutta later, and everyone's just going to table that for the time being, because there's now this sketchy family history to the Chakraborty family. And this sends Iswar into a tailspin. All of his integrity, all the good things he's done up to this point.
Well, isn't this the movie in which at some early point somebody says what everyone wants out of life is to just get a piece and then hold on to it?
Yeah, I think that's
words to that effect.
Yeah.
And this is what he's going to do. He's got this little, piece of middle classness and economic security.
He's even got a stake in the company, potentially.
He's a manager.
It's being dangled. No, not only a manager. If he's going to be having shares in it, he's going to be a part owner.
That's what the owner came to talk about. He's got a stake in the system now, and he absolutely can't fuck this up. He can't let anybody fuck this up.
Yeah, and it just breaks his brain.
Yeah.
All of his previous commitments, he now no longer cares and doesn't want to be responsible for Abiram going to Germany. So all this fighting they've been doing about whether he's going to be an engineer or not, he's now happy that that Abiram doesn't want to do it. And when he does find out, as everyone suspected or should have suspected, that the two younger family members wish to marry each other, he's like, absolutely not. He's getting out of here tomorrow.
And then he starts using some very gross language about how a family's coming to take a look at Cheetah. Like she's a piece of property they're going to buy, which she is.
Yes, exactly. It's a double move here. He's getting rid of Abiram and removing temptation from her path by immediately attempting to just lock her up with someone else, some other family.
Obviously, she is very, very affronted by this, given what an equal and loving and tender relationship they had 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, no, this is an absolute horrifying betrayal, right?
Yeah.
And it's cemented when he actually hits her in the face for refusing to follow his orders.
That's a pretty interesting scene. It's like the best striking scene I've seen since The Idol in our Jennifer Jones series. There's just so much going on there. Why do you suppose she immediately capitulates? It's not because she's afraid of getting a beating. I mean, he could start beating her, but that's not why she would capitulate. She says it's because
she doesn't want him to go any further down this tyrannical path.
I think that really is
because you can see how much it's tormenting him to work himself up to doing this, and she can see it.
He's going to cross a line and commit a sin that he can't come back from if he beats her.
Well, he might potentially kill her. He says he'd rather see her dead.
Well, afterwards he does say that, yeah.
That's always there as a possibility, and unfortunately it does come true much later on for not exactly the same reasons.
Why does he say something, why does he get so deranged about it if all he's trying to do is defend his little stake here.
Well,
his
because
little stake in capitalism.
It's all or nothing, right? He can't let her marry this low-caste person. That will immediately discredit him with his employer. So what has he been doing? It's all lost if that happens.
But it turns out, of course, when she does run away, he retains his job.
It's true, but it doesn't seem like he thinks that that's what's going to happen. Eventually, as long as the scandal is swept under the rug and no one talks about it, he's able to get away with it and continue with his shallow shell life.
What he can't do is openly embrace the marriage.
No, he can't.
Which is obviously what
them.
she wants him to do.
So he fights her as hard as he can. He arranges a marriage. The day comes. She's all dressed up for the marriage, but she is a runaway bride and escapes with Aviram, and they go to Calcutta.
She throws her bridal headgear into the canal or whatever.
And there we get kind of like Pierre or something, you know, like a little bit more straightforwardly happy for a little while anyway.
They do have their little moment of happiness.
Yeah, they carve out a life for themselves. They have a child.
He has to become a bus driver, but he does even that cheerfully.
Yeah, he's willing to do whatever he needs to do. He's not happy that his writing isn't selling, but this too can be paradise. He's joking around about the inefficient brakes on the buses that he's being given to drive. Grim foreshadowing of what we almost are sure is coming, which is that he's going to die.
Okay, everything at this point, after they run away together, from this point on, you know everything that's going to come is broadcast. It's like that kind of setup where the horror is that you know what's going to happen.
Well, some of it. I didn't expect everything that happened.
Okay, well, first of all, there was Chekhov's prostitute illusion.
Yeah, that for sure.
So we know that she's at some point going to be forced to become a prostitute. And once that was in place, as soon as the brother goes on his drinking spree...
Oh yeah, but who could have predicted that? The drinking spree itself.
Yeah, but as soon as he's on the drinking spree, didn't you know what was going to happen?
Yeah.
It's the plot logic. You don't include details unless the details are relevant.
Right.
And so by process of elimination, this is what's going to happen.
But, I thought the brother was going to wind up just being a catatonic, insane person on the plantation. That's where the rhyme seemed to be leading for him.
Well, he goes
through that phase.
He goes through that phase. He has a moment with the sitar that he slammed her face into. So he contemplates that for a bit, and then he just decides to get over with and hang himself. But it's kind of like when Nita tries to run out into the storm to end her misery. Someone shows up and says, no, you're going to go through some more.
Yeah. And
I'm going to drag this out for you.
Harampasad, who had shunned him as soon as he went. We didn't mention that, actually. When Iswar takes the job on the plantation, his former comrade and fellow refugee camp leader condemns him as a deserter and says he'll have nothing more to do with him.
Oh, but we did get this whole
We got an update on...
An update. What happened to his wife?
She killed herself.
Wife killed herself because the children were starving.
Yeah, and Harampasad was completely improvident moron, wandering around town, and his wife dies. And still, he refuses to allow his children to be sent to Iswar at that point.
Improvident moron? What do you mean?
Well, he couldn't bring in any money.
Oh, okay.
Just this...
I thought there was some detail I missed. Says himself, when he shows up, keeping your integrity, sacrificing your integrity, makes no difference. We have ended up in the same boat. We are completely miserable and want to die.
Yeah, but he says, no, instead we're going to take a different path. The path of hedonism.
And he says that he is his...
ghost.
Some more Gothic references.
Yeah, but he's really not a ghost. He's actually there. But yeah, I thought he was a ghost for quite a bit of time.
Really?
But no, once they get to Calcutta, I'm like, no, this is really happening. This insane...
He's a very corporeal ghost.
Yeah. They go and drink and drink and drink and listen to pop music.
But this is all done, like in this movie, as opposed to Cloudcap Star. In Cloudcap Star, everyone except Nita is kind of a comical caricature, as awful as they get. But in this movie, everything's been played pretty straightforwardly, dramatically, until this point, and then they start doing this comedy routine, this awful comedy routine together. Yeah. And it starts out innocently enough, because he's talking about pleasures of the flesh, that's, all we have left, that's all there is in life, basically. But then they're at the fucking racetrack, so that was just hilarious.
Yeah, that was cute.
But then it's not so cute anymore.
No, it spirals further and further out of control until, yes, he mentions, how about music girls? And yeah, then you know he's going to wind up trying to sleep with his sister.
I knew well before that. I knew from the time they were drinking.
Yeah, they show up at this...
And then it's confirmed when he breaks his glasses.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing anymore. He's too drunk to know. But yeah, he says, yes, that sounds like a good idea. Let's find dancing
but
girls.
He also breaks his glasses. He can't see anything.
Yeah, but he wants to go see a prostitute.
Yes.
And he's taken to this dive where there is a prostitute apparently waiting for him, a high-caste girl who is doing this because her family has lost everything.
And it's her first time, and that sounds like a real salesman pitch, but it's actually true.
We see Sheeta again, and her child is with her. Madam takes the child off her hand so that this transaction can occur. Sheeta is getting ready, she's getting dressed up, but she's also preparing like a scythe or something to kill herself with.
So you think she was planning that anyway?
It seemed like she was at least thinking about it, right? Because the weapon, she's preparing the weapon before he walks in. Maybe she's like not sure if she's really going to go through with it, but it's something that she's considering if it starts to go really badly anyway.
And I do think it's obvious within the conventions here that she is not the kind of person who's going to be able to go through with this life anyway.
No, and certainly not when her brother walks in the door or stumbles through the door. Absolute worst case scenario. She picks up the weapon and kills herself.
Particularly since the incest atmosphere is prevalent in both films.
It's nightmarish, very stylized suicide.
It's just like an absolute
everywhere.
Sick inversion of their intimate relationship.
And he's just standing there, can't focus, doesn't see what's happening really. He does at least understand that someone has killed themselves in front of him, and he eventually comes to understand that it's his sister.
Now, apparently... Oh, I shouldn't have gotten rid of that article. Apparently, a voice comes over the soundtrack while he's trying to focus on her, according to one of these articles I read, and says, "Hey, Ram," which a critic has taken to be a reference to Gandhi's assassin.
Really? Interesting.
Therefore, conflating her suicide with the assassination of Gandhi.
Well, I saw that in the subtitles, Hey Ram.
Oh, I missed that too. Yeah. I was too freaked out by the whole scene.
Yeah, a lot of things were happening. But yeah, I did see that, and I heard it, but I didn't know what it meant.
Well, no one does know, but that is an account that has been given.
Okay. And then we get, a police inquest.
Because the assassination of Gandhi, I don't know if we mentioned it, is brought up at the beginning of this movie.
It is. We come into the story and we leave the story through the objective point of view of these newspaper men.
Yeah.
Or we don't quite leave it, but they come back at the end. The police get involved.
You'd think he'd just join her and this would be the end.
Right.
Nope.
No, it's much more interesting than that.
Well, yeah, he can't quite go through with making this the end of the film.
Then it would just be Pierre, almost, right? And no, that's not this guy's vision. He's not a nihilist.
No, but this is clearly one of the worst things I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, well, it was horrifying. Yeah, definitely. But it would be a sort of tempting ending for him to just execute himself.
Maybe his vision is more like David Lynch's, and it includes the best and the worst.
Yeah, a lot of chances for people to try to atone for the horrible or misguided things they've done. That is where this eventually goes, even though he's insisting to the police and all the reporters, everyone that will listen, that he is responsible for this murder, and he is, philosophically. Everyone, I think, can agree. He's telling the truth about that. But he's not culpable in the eyes of the law. He did not actually put the weapon into her body.
Yeah.
So he is released, given custody of his nephew.
This is a real theatrical device, too, that we saw it in Mizoguchi movie, where the man discovers his long-lost wife, and she's a prostitute who's serving him. Yeah, this kind of horrible shit actually does occur in folktales and very old drama based on folktales. We're just not used to it in modern movies.
And I guess obviously it's a way, if you're a moralist of some sort, to get people to think about the people you're exploiting. Imagine if, this is actually your daughter or something, right? Like a shortcut to getting people to think about people that they wouldn't normally think about.
Also, as I was waiting for the scene to happen, speaking of David Lynch, I of course kept thinking about that scene from Fire Walk with Me.
Right, where he shows up at the motel to have sex with 2 girls, and one of them happens to be his daughter, and he's not in Bob mode.
Yeah.
So he runs away. If only this guy had run away without going in. He goes back to the plantation with his nephew.
His nephew, who is now the daughter and the low-caste orphan combined.
Yeah, and he's a very...
So it's a real obvious second chance here.
Very lovable child.
Oh, remember when Everram is a little boy? He just keeps showing these shots of this child's beatific grin?
Yeah, I mean, there's always hope when you have children.
And there was that scene where she sings a song to him.
Yeah.
Has she made a song out of the imaginary place? Is that what's occurred?
Exactly. So that's why he knows about it.
Yeah.
This is a refrain that has continued throughout the film.
So he asks if that's where they're going to go, just like at the beginning when she wants to know if they're going to their new home.
Yeah, and this is a major test for Iswar because he still has never lied. Now, the intervening thing that we learn is that
he has no job.
He's been fired because of this scandal, and Mukherjee finally is the manager.
And there is a huge scandal attached to him, so how he's going to find any other work is a complete mystery.
Presumably he can probably find some kind of work as a day laborer or something, but not as a manager, that's for sure, or any kind of responsible person.
To be quite honest, right to the very end, I kept thinking either...
He's going to keel over.
No, I thought he was going to kill the child.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't think that.
Because they aren't going to a real place, and the child does say, oh, when we get there, I'll meet my father and mother, won't I? And there is no hope. There is no actual future, happy future possible for them. And we aren't given even the slightest inkling of a real possible happy future for them.
Well, okay, sure, but the major thing that happens in that scene is that Iswar realizes that there's something more important than what he conceives of as the truth, which is hope. And
but it's a hope that is absolutely baseless.
Well, hope always seems baseless, I would think. You know, if you look at our world, is there any basis for hope? Probably not, but you still have to do it. I think that is really important. So this ultra-pragmatist who has done everything wrong based on his own ideas about, limiting what you can expect out of life, finally realizes that what he owes to the next generation is to indulge in a little idealism at last as they head off screen into the mountains. And yeah, what becomes of them, I don't know.
God only knows. It's one of those deliberately blank endings where you really can't see
but to give us
what there is to happen.
Give us a character like Iswar who goes through this insane journey that he goes on, and I don't know, to me that was a very impactful moment as he wrestles with telling the truth or not telling the truth about the golden thread, the silver lining. It makes everything pay off wonderfully.
All right, we had a different experience of the ending.
You thought it was like a bitter irony?
No, God, no, not at
okay.
all. But more like an admission that within the confines of reality, there is no future for them. There is only this fantasy.
Yeah, it's like a little match girl kind of ending. To me, I do think that the intentionality of his willingness to misrepresent what the future holds, I think is something significant. And I feel, to me anyway, that's my interpretation, that the film is about...
No, I think that's how you're supposed to feel. It's just I was too overwhelmed by all the shit that's happened.
Well, yeah, that's valid, I think. All right, well, anything else, Elise?
Yes, we've been pronouncing cast wrong for the entire podcast.
I suspected
we weren't pronouncing podcast wrong.
No, that's right.
Yeah, I suspected as much too. That's what makes it so weird. But podcasting is full of surprises like that. As soon as we finished recording, I was like, why was I pronouncing cast wrong the whole time? I know how to pronounce it. But I decided to actually look it up, so I'll remember it better in future, why you pronounce it that way. It is apparently a borrowing from Portuguese. Casta, race breed, from casto, pure unmixed, from Latin castus, chaste. So it is etymologically related to chaste, which is pronounced chaste for some reason in English, and therefore to incest. But that's an entire coincidence because obviously the word caste is not actually used in the film.
Right, and it's presumably from the Portuguese because they were the first to extend their colonial tendrils to India in the 16th century.
So this little mispronunciation fiasco gave us a learning opportunity. What's next week, Dave?
Next week, we're going back to Hollywood studios year by year. It's Universal 1932. This is a very interesting double feature, I think. We're going to be talking about Backstreet, directed by John Stahl, and Murders in the Rue Morgue, directed by Robert Florey.
I've seen both in my 20s. I've seen Backstreet a couple of times. I don't remember Murders of the Rue Morgue. I do remember being told it's very crazy before I watched it the first time. Maybe it'll make more impact this time.
No one can imagine how crazy this movie is. It doesn't have that much to do with the Poe story upon which it is supposed to be based. That's a Dupin story.
There's a gorilla, right?
Yeah, but there's a gorilla in a way that's very different from the gorilla in the story.
No, I just don't remember. So I'm looking forward to revisiting that.
So Irene Dunn and Bela Lugosi next time on the podcast.
Perfect double feature.
See you then.